But yeah, I mean, the customer understanding is crucial, and our customers, I mean, we know, they really, investigative reporting watchdog, when you make a difference in a community, it's the most valuable thing for any publishing organization, whether it's print, radio, TV. And they know the cost, and you know, we're chump change what we're charging for now. But like I said, it's the first step, and we started from the beginning, we were going to charge. We just want to establish that's what we were going to charge. We didn't give it away. But I can tell you, we didn't know what would happen when we said we're charging. Because if everybody had said no, we would have given it away, because one of our ROI, or our metric, was audience. The people who funded us wanted audience. I mean, and now what they want, one of the big foundations recently said to me, "You've knocked distribution so far out of the ballpark, no one can believe it. Now figure out engagement and impact." They want, you know, they want the public to take action in a way. So, again, I think from a traditional point of view, you know, editorial pages did what they did, but the opportunity now through technology to generate community, generate interest through the social media is something I think we're all going to be trying to figure out. And then I think the line of advocacy is going to be a dangerous one and a tricky one to manage as we go forward. And we talked a little about this earlier. I know I've turned down money, and people haven't given me money because we're not seen as either being progressive enough or conservative on some level. So it's something that, you know, we're all going to have to deal with. And again, my view anyway is that the trusted content in this age of clutter and disinformation and siloing of information is going to be the most valuable for a select group.
I think just kind of add it at the end, which I'll be talking a little bit later, but there's been this assumption that you have to convince people to pay for your content. And what I've been learning in the last few months when I started is that, well, there are other channels out there where people are paying for content now. And I remember back when I worked at AOL, there was this phrase out there, and there were people, I mean, obviously it didn't work at the time, but it was fish where the fish are. If you're going out there eating a fish, you know, you can try to, you know, convince the fish, you know, sit there and say, "Hey, you're fishies, come over here, here's my fishing pole." But it may be better to kind of take it, you know, like just go up on, you know, top of a rock and look and see where the fish are, and then maybe change your strategy based on that, which I think is more of a consumer products kind of approach that journalists are not really taught, and you kind of have to learn it. But I think that now we're starting to see it with these, especially with apps, devices, people are buying content today. So I'll talk about that a little bit later.
You know, what strikes me, I spent a lot of time in the local advertising media side of the business, not the newspaper side of the business, but what you're trying to do, and what I keep hearing coming through, is you're trying to preserve quality journalism and storytelling. And to me, that while that's attracted advertising in the past in the newspaper space, it was really the audience that was attracting the advertising, not the product. So you atomize those components now, and you don't have, you know, a connection, and advertising has all sorts of alternatives for distribution. So to me, what you're, you know, you appeal more to you know, the money that goes to community and sponsorship and local image than it does trying to attach ads to your product per se, because you don't have enough scale of distribution, and you have variability in content, so you can't say, well, I can align my content to advertising because my content is constantly changing, and your audience is too nascent to really justify the cost of sales and so forth. So to me, there's a large amount of spending, whether it's advertising or community sponsorship in a community from the larger corporations, that to me, marketing the cause of you know, the society value of quality journalism, you know, feels like a stronger pitch than trying to cobble together some new ad model. Because frankly, those models are being cobbled together, but they don't need you. I mean, that's the problem. You're trying to put something back together like the newspaper did, but basically had an audience for, and that could attract advertising for those advertisers that 20 different places they can find the audience.
I think that's a really important point. So just to try to summarize it, and then you can tell me where I got it wrong. Newspapers especially, but other media too, were selling eyeballs. That's really what the business model was all about.
Advertisers bought audience.
Exactly. But corporations, businesses buy other things than eyeballs. They buy goodwill, they buy, you know, trust, they buy retention of employees, they buy...
Spend to affiliations.
Yes,
Affiliations
yes,
is
yes.
part of what larger businesses, especially ones who have a large employee base in the community and so forth, they view that as part of the act of the community.
I'll go one further with you, which is I totally agree with you, by the way. And I think that, you know, I've been in the breaking news business, and I've been in the Hollywood side of things, which is, we'll go to that another time. But, you know, the fact is, one of the things that attracted me so much to investigative journalism is that it's non-commoditized, right? It's highly unlikely that 3 different outlets are going to be reporting on the same investigation, and they're sharing data. So, as I see it, and when I look up there at both Laura and Rosie, they're both actually syndicating content in a way that says, we don't have to monetize at the point of production. We'll let other people take that, and they can worry about that monetization if they have that size audience. We're in the business of creating content that's differentiating in the marketplace, and that people who need that differentiation then figure out how to monetize that. And I think that we are in the production business, therefore, of investigative journalism, not necessarily in the consumer or advertising monetization business.
I don't agree with that. You've got to worry about where that content's going to ultimately be consumed. If you're not thinking the next stage or the next part of the value chain, you're going to get surprised. And I don't think you can just ignore who's going to consume that information, that content.
Why? I'm not saying we do ignore it, but take it instead of, well, how is where people take it? For example, take a repost us. They're letting anybody repost it, right? You're not controlling the sort of way content is done.
Well, I think that Laura's made a couple of points. She's talking about context. Rosie talked about a story. If you're not providing that, then people aren't going to take what you have to offer. There's a certain part of the product that you're going to provide that has to appeal, has to be solve a need of that ultimate consumer. And if you're not, I think you're going to find that.
I think you're both saying the same thing from a different side of the table, because I know Kevin is thinking about quality. We're all thinking about quality. I mean, that's our whole, the niche that we have is quality. And by that, when we use that word, we mean something that people want, people need and want. There have been big questions, as Mike just brought up, about how much they want it, how much are they willing to pay for it. But when Kevin says we don't have to monetize it at this end, in other words, I'm not trying to draw audience to my iNews website. I'm not trying to create something new and bring audience there. I'm letting somebody else take it to the next step to that audience. But I definitely, you're absolutely right, have to make sure that it's something that their audience is going to want.
Because if they don't like
Nobody's
it, they're not
buying
gonna buy
it.
from you.
Exactly, exactly,
That's what-
exactly.
I find everything that we've been talking about really fascinating, but I feel like I have a question about, you have iNews, it's a Western News Network, you have these amazing new startups that are, like whole businesses, but especially today, you have an enormous volume of freelance journalists out there, and we're not looking to publications anymore to fund our stories. And we all can't work for a news network. And we're often funding projects on a project-by-project basis. So I think that involves a whole different business model. And I have no idea what that is. Trying to figure it out. But what kinds of things do we need to be doing that are taking some of these applications of the ISV network, but funding the talent, the storytelling talent that's going to provide the content?
I don't know how to
Go ahead.
In the old days, if somebody was a freelancer, we went to the editor of the paper and we said, how much is in your freelance budget, Rosie? And he would say $300. And you would say, okay, I'll do the story for you for $300. And that's how the transaction went. Now, you are not just a journalist, you're also a business person. So you know that you would go and say, Rosie, how much are you paying for the service that does comments at the end of your you know, at the end of your stories, how much are you paying New York Times news service? So you have some sort of business relevance because the frame of the paradigm has changed. So I think that it's essential for anybody to have a business sense and to get as much business training and business experience as they can and really think about change the way that they're doing. Because if we were just relying, if iNews was just relying on the old freelance model, you know, if people were thinking, oh, I can have an iNews story package for what I usually pay for a freelance story, it would never support investigative journalism.
Yeah, the big question to me is that, you know, there's two of my very good friends that are CEOs of Salon.com examiners, so have these crazy debates here all the time. But to me, you know, creating a true business out of what you're doing, I guess I challenge listeners to that debate. There's, if you optimize for business and optimize for investors, you become the van media, which are basically saying the best path to maximize return for shareholders is to script your writing for the maximum advertiser value. You create an entire engine around that model. Examiners a little between salons a little more to, you know, to the preservation of quality journalism, but trying to direct to a theme, if you will, that is the best affinity for it. And it doesn't feel to me like your parts are there versus at the other extreme, which is to say there's fundamentally a non-profit society model that you're trying to preserve.
No, I don't think we're trying to preserve the nonprofit society model. I think we're in that moment. But I think ideally we'd figure out a way to generate enough revenue to sustain this. And I think, you know, one of the things from my view.
What you just said, a business person would never say. We're trying to sustain enough revenue to stay in business.
Right. No, I understand that.
So,
but that's why we need, and you know, we can go if we could find the right mechanism or vehicle or piece of what we do to create a for-profit. We would do that. I mean, I think that the LC3. But I think where I'm going is that I'm not sure, I don't know your name, I'm sorry. But, you know, to me it's the story, and we're seeing the evolution of technology where we're not going to need publishers. I mean, you're not going to need a network, on television network. The freelance story, if it's good enough and becomes an app, can be downloaded and shown, you know, through your iPad, and you'll watch it on a big video screen someplace. The channel, the concept of channels, or you know, everything's moving. But the key thing is going to be the story. And if we can brand a story CIR or whatever, you know, organization it is, and it moves enough on all these different platforms, there's going to be a way to create loyalty and audience and customers, so that individual, I think, can be reached to help support what you're doing. You create a value, a societal value around the content. And at the same time, in our model, we're also going to a big publisher who will pay us for it. But I know the story is going all over the place in different ways none of us even can imagine, and it's going to accelerate. And I think another key thing is to have in our organizations, if we could afford it, would be what I call the technologists, the really the Merlin and the magician hat, you know, because they're looking ahead. It's not about what's happening now, it's where this is all going. And that's where I come back to the content on all these platforms. And if it's unique and high quality and relevant to people, that's what we have to keep doing. And I think the value proposition is going to be created.